All right, so implementing host and software security. So now that we've identified different types of threats to our computing environment, we need to look at the state of security in our organization. So we need strong security measures to help prevent threats from exploiting any of our assets. So we're going to talk about implementing security for systems, devices, and other hosts, implementing cloud and virtualization security, implementing mobile device security, and incorporating security in the cloud development lifecycle. All right, so hardening. Hardening is a security technique for altering a system's configuration to close any of the vulnerabilities that to close vulnerabilities and protect the system from different types of attacks. So there are many different hardening techniques that can be employed. It depends on the type of system and how much security we really need, right? So when hardening a system, we need to keep in mind why we are intending to use this type of security, because hardening the system is going to restrict a system's capability and system access. So the need for needs to be balanced against any accessibility. Um, so when it comes to the operating system security, each operating system is going to have a unique set of vulnerabilities for attackers to exploit. So because different OS types and different operation systems from different vendors have their own weaknesses, vendors are going to try to correct vulnerabilities while the attackers are going to try to exploit them. So there's always new patches, there's always new vulnerabilities. So there's never going to be a single list of all the vulnerabilities for each operating systems. So we're going to need to stay up to date with any info that's going to be posted by our vendors. We want to turn on automated updates and things of that nature. So some of the different types of operating systems there are network operating systems, server operating systems, workstation operating systems, appliance operating systems, kiosk OSs, and also mobile OSs. When it comes to hardening techniques on these operating systems, we are going to use some of the similar principles that we've used in other areas, right? So we want to use the principle of least privilege and ensure that the operating system is adhering to that, and we want to make sure that the system is not providing any type of functionality that is beyond the scope of its purpose, right? So we shouldn't have a domain controller that's used for other purposes, such as being a file server, right? It should be set to one thing. Uh, we need to disable any unnecessary network ports on the system firewall. We want to disable any unnecessary services that are running on the system to reduce the attack surface, right? The attack surface, once again, is the different ways that people could get into our system. We want to take advantage of any secure configurations that are provided by the vendor or any industry recognized organizations, because these can help us make a better defense, right? We need to disable any default accounts, because default accounts, everybody knows the answers for these, right? All you have to do is do a quick Google search, and you can find out, default username and passwords on pretty much anything. We're going to want to force our users to change any default passwords. That way, they can make something that is unique to them. And then we want to implement patch management software. That way we can effectively manage any automatic updates for our systems. The trusted computing base. The trusted computer base is a hardware, firmware, or a software component of a computing system that is responsible for ensuring that the security policy is going to be implemented and the system is secure. This means that the security properties of the system could be jeopardized should there be any defects inside this trusted computing base. So the trusted computing base is implemented in the hardware through processor rigs or privileges, right? And also through the firmware, through driver and resource protection, and then in the operating system, uh, through isolation of resources and services from applications. So, a trusted operating system is one that is fully complies with any security requirements that are established in the common criteria. So the common criteria is a set of standards that are developed by a group um, of governments working together for creating a baseline of security assurance in a product, right? So when a trusted operating system is used, the organization's claims of having a secure product could be evaluated and judged. So anything that is tested is then going to be given a evaluation level rating from 1 to 7, and so this is going to state the level of secure features that are offered by a specific system. When it comes to hardware and security firmware, we have several components that are going to comprise our hardware and firmware elements of the trusted computing base, and we are going to go over a few of these. So, first up, we have the BIOS slash UEFI. So, BIOS stands for Basic Input Output System, and UEFI is Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. Both are firmware interfaces that initialize the hardware when our operating system is booting, right? So UEFI is the more modern and secure implementation, and BIOS is currently being replaced. After that, we have the root of trust and HSM. So root of trust is technology that enforces a hardware's trusted computing architecture through things like encryption, and is designed to keep data confidential and prevent tampering. However, the HSM is actually a physical device that provides root of trust capabilities. Then we have the TPM. The TPM is a trusted platform module, and this is going to be a secure crypto processor that is used to generate cryptographic keys in areas of the trusted computing base. So after that, we have secure boot and remote attestation. So secure boot is an actual UEFI feature that is going to prevent any unwanted processes from executing during the boot's operation. It takes a cryptographic hash of the bootloader, and that way it ensures its integrity. All right. So this is going to help make sure that that viruses don't get down to the hardware level. Then we have TPM, and so TPM signs a report of this boot hash, and then this can be sent to a third party for remote verification if that's what somebody needed. So that is called remote attestation. Then we have FDE, and SED. So that is full disk encryption when we're talking about hardware based, and this is going to be used on devices called self-encrypting drives, which is the SED. So this is going to ensure that our storage devices are encrypted at the hardware level, and avoids us relying on software solutions which are less secure. So this is going to be invisible to you and me as the user, and it's not going to be susceptible to attacks targeting any encryptions by the operating system or the applications within it, right? So this makes sure this. So the only way it could be the disk can be unencrypted is if the user is going to put in the passcode during startup, right? And then the hardware will be unencrypted. Then we have EMI protection. So all electronics are going to generate some sort of electromagnetic interference, EMI. So this can potentially leak sensitive data if any of this is being leaked out to anybody trying to watch the EMI that is generated. And then finally, we have EMP protection. So EMP is electromagnetic pulses. These can be used to cause hardware to malfunction. And some trusted computing bases are going to include protections against this. Now, these are going to be probably pretty strong protections because an EMP, I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but EMP is something that's commonly referred to. There's other ways that it could be done, but commonly when they're talking about a nuclear blast detonated higher up in the atmosphere to the point where it doesn't actually damage things like physically on the ground, like blow them up, but it knocks out all electric devices, right? Um, that's also a concern with solar flares as well. They're said to be able to potentially cause EMP that could knock out like satellites and stuff in space and potentially even electronics on the ground. Um, After that, we have our security baselines. So, security baselines, these are going to be a collection of security settings, right? Um, and they're going to be a crucial step to our security in our system. So constructing baselines needs to be streamlined. That way, that rather than us harden each system in a vacuum, we'll be able to draw from our baseline and then use that as a template, right? So because each baseline configuration is going to be particular to the different type of system that we're using, we're going to have separate baselines set up for any of our workstations, any of our file or print servers, maybe even our domain name server, applications, directories, all different types of systems. So we're going to have different baselines for all of these systems as well, depending on what type of operating system we're actually using. So when it comes to software updates, as I've said before, software manufacturers, they're going to regularly issue different type of updates, and these updates will likely include patches and stuff to enhance our security, right? So installing the appropriate updates can make the complete difference between vulnerable code and hardened code, right? Remember, that's how Equifax went down because they did not update a patch when they had the chance to. Um, so a patch is going to be a small unit of code that is meant to address either a security problem or some sort of functionality flaw in their software or operating system, right? Then we have a hotfix. So a hotfix is a patch that's going to be issued on an emergency basis, right? And it is going to address a specific security flaw that needs to be addressed quickly. Um, Followed by that, we have a rollup. A rollup is going to be a collection of previously issued patches or hotfixes. Um, and it can be applied to like maybe a browser or a particular service or something like that. And then after that, we have a service patch. Service pack. That's going to be a larger set of system updates. They can include functionality enhancements, new features. They're going to have all the patches and updates that were issued up to the point of that service patch release. So we'll see that a lot in Windows systems. A lot of times they implement service packs. So you might have Microsoft Service Patch, Windows 10 SP number 3 or whatever the case is. Then we have application blacklisting and whitelisting. So application blacklisting is going to be preventing the execution of applications that are on a list of unauthorized applications, right? Um, so we are saying we don't want you running on our system, right? So the problem with this is we may not have identified everything that we don't want on our system, right? We don't know all the malicious apps out there, so it may not be the best idea. So we're going to need to come up with a balance between that and whitelisting So whitelisting is going to be preventing any execution of apps that are not on a list of authorized applications. So the problem with this is you have to continue to um, update this. You may not know everything that you want to allow on your system. So it's kind of, we need to have some sort of balance here. So whitelisting is going to be a more thorough than blacklisting. Um, but the administrative overhead could be a problem, right? Logging. So logging is going to be using an operating system or application to record data about activity on a computer, right? So the log files are usually going to be stored as text files in a specific location. There's going to be differing levels of detail. They could vary from, only showing significant issues, or they could be recording every single keystroke. It could be every single mouse movement, everything you ever do, every network package, right? So we need to pretty much use care in enabling these logging functions because simple logging can consume massive amounts of resources and storage space, right? Because we're every little thing can be logged, right? But we do need to, after we have established some sort of logging, we do need to review our logging because this can reveal information about a specific attack, right? Or a suspected one. So another thing we need to realize is that log files themselves can be the target of an attack because people want to cover their tracks, right? So we are going to want to restrict access and back up logs routinely to make sure that nothing is tampered with. Auditing. So this is going to be the process of performing an organized evaluation of system security to ensure its compliance, right? So it's like a security assessment. However, the security audit is going to be focused on seeing whether the system is meeting a set of criteria. So these criteria, they can come from laws, they can come from regulations and standards from different industries, or it can come from our organizational policy. Um, so as a result of that, most of our audits are going to be by third party organizations because um, it's easy to investigate ourselves and say that we're in compliance, but it's another thing to have somebody else come in and make sure you're in compliance, right? Because people like to pat themselves on the back. Um, so an example of this might be an auditor to check to see if the online merchant is in compliance with PCI DSS. So that has to do with credit card transactions, and so um, they have to be audited every so often, and a lot of times I believe it is specifically for an external auditor. Um, Another thing with auditing, it's commonly associated with reviewing security logs, right? So this might be manually, it could be through software. Um, it might test the strength of our passwords. It might be scanning firewalls. It might be reviewing permissions for users in different groups. Um, However, this needs to be done because it contributes to the overall security hardening process, right? Because this is from the outside looking in. All right. Then we have anti-malware software. So, anti-malware software is going to be software that scans systems and networks for malicious software. This could be for stuff like, viruses, trojans, worms. Um, some programs, they're going to scan for known malware. Others are going to scan for unknown malware. Um, we should install anti-malware on all our computers, um, and we want to keep our anti-malware applications up to date, so that way we can be up to date with all the new malware that is actually being found, because new malware is found every day. Uh, so there are different types of anti-malware software. and some of these softwares they may combine two or more into a single application. But we have first up antiviruses. So antiviruses are going to scan for code matching specific um, virus patterns. Antivirus software is going to actively monitor the system with maybe signature based um, antivirus software. So it's looking for activity that matches a certain signature of a specific virus. Um, or We can also actively monitor the system for different virus activity. So this could be behavioral based. So this type of virus acts in this certain way, or it could be heuristic, in which that is similar to behavioral based, but it kind of uses machine learning to try to figure things out as well. Then we have anti spam. So anti spam is going to be this can include filters, right? Anti-spam filtering, and this will detect specific words that are used in spam messages. And then things might be rejected depending on specific words that are found. Maybe even the amount of people that are sent an email or something like that at one time. So this may cause problems because legitimate messages could be blocked out, right? Um, this happened to me in one of our classes in which I sent out um, a email inviting people to attend a class and congratulating them on passing the 1 day um, exams, right? And so, because I had sent it out to so many people and used specific words such as congratulations and you're invited, it was all kicked to everybody's spam filter. But once I had sent these out individually, they didn't go to the spam filter, through that spam filter into the spam box. Um, we can also block specific IPs because they're known spammers, right? So you won't receive any mail from them. Then we also have anti-spyware. So this is going to be software that is designed to protect our systems against spyware attacks, right? So spyware, um, as we went through before, these are things that are spying on your activities on the computer. Um, so sometimes we need to have um, specific anti-spyware applications, but a lot of times it's going to come prepackaged with antivirus software. We also have pop-up blockers. So these are gonna, everybody should know what this is, right? This is gonna prevent pop-ups from sites that are unknown or untrusted. Um, it's gonna, well, honestly, most browsers nowadays include some sort of pop-up blocking features, but you can also add additional ones. And then we have host-based firewalls. So this is gonna be software that is gonna be installed um, on a single system, right, on our host to guard against networking attacks. So the software is going to be configured specifically to monitor for any incoming or outgoing network packets in order to control and prevent any unauthorized access. So it's not, it can block malware, but it's not specifically designed for malware, right? It's just for um, packet control, basically. All right, hardware security. All right, so um, we need to secure our hardware. Different peripherals can connect to our host, right? And so we may not think of these as being vulnerable, but they actually still are, right? So we have wireless mice and keyboards. So some of these wireless mice and keyboards are going to be vulnerable to hijacking, right? So the attacker could possibly send signals to the mouse to force clicks, or the keyboards to force keystrokes, right? Because this is wireless and it's coming through Bluetooth and stuff like that. So the attackers could actually also intercept the user's keystrokes because it's getting sent through a wireless signal. So the most effective means of doing this would be to stay up to date with our firmware patches, but and also research any devices to make sure they're not vulnerable. But then also Probably actually having a hardware setup, right? And not wireless, right? Um, However, those can be vulnerable potentially as well, but they will necessitate somebody to actually actively tap your system hardware. Um, then we have displays. So monitors and displays can be potentially susceptible to hijacking. Uh, Probably something more like a smart TV or something like that. So um, we want to ensure that our operating systems and firmware are up to date. Most likely, what we may see is a lot of times our monitors and displays have cameras built into them, so somebody may be actively watching you through your camera. But also maybe they put up messages on your displays on your work display. Um, a lot of times people deface websites. So in this case, maybe your monitors are defaced with un unnecessary, potentially disastrous messages. Maybe they put up information that is, you know, secret information to your organization or something like that, right? Then we have external storage devices. So these are going to be devices that are potentially used as an attack vector, right, to load any malicious code on a host. So USBs, right? Those would be the big one there. Um, they also, I guess, could potentially be CDs and stuff like that. If any of you seen Mr. Robot, one thing they did there, and one thing that's actively been done by penetration testers, is to maybe hand out free USBs or CDs outside of an organization to see if somebody's going to load them onto the computer, or maybe drop USBs or something out in the parking lot and see if somebody will load them onto the computer, and then malicious software will run and potentially giving up access, installing backdoors, or maybe just destroying the system, right? So you're going to want to disable auto run for sure, to make sure that malicious software isn't run at least at boot, right? Then we have printers and multifunctional devices. So attackers potentially will print unwanted material and waste ink. So maybe they're putting out, some sort of agenda, right? They're printing that out on all your printers, or maybe a lot of times, people when they do this, they like to waste ink, like print out nothing but black ink, so that way they run out. Ink is expensive, so that way your organization runs out of all your ink, right? So you're gonna want strong wireless security to prevent any unwanted access. Um, and you're going to want to set that device to wipe any memory or storage after every usage, because that can reduce the chance of any data leakage, because potentially people can get information from any of that leakage, right? And then we have our cameras and microphones. So digital cameras, webcams, all sorts of multimedia peripherals can be used for eavesdropping. And then we want to make sure that our really sensitive hosts turn off any applications or drivers that use these when you're not actively using them. Especially if these devices are going to be internet connected, we're going to want to change any default passwords for remote access. Embedded systems. This is going to be our hardware and software systems that have specific functions within a larger system, right? So these systems can be stuff like home appliances, microwaves, dishwashers, or large industrial type machines, right? Embedded systems are going to be found in all different types of technologies, uh, over all different industries. So a lot of times these embedded systems are not going to have the hardware complexity of a personal computer or a server, and because they have a dedicated function, they're going to be less sophisticated in their architecture. So some embedded systems aren't going to have their own CPUs or memory modules. They may roll all of these components into a single one. A lot of them aren't even user friendly, right? They don't have a GUI based system. So, um, regardless that they don't have that type of complexity, a lot of them still use an operating system, and that larger system would be a lot more user friendly, right? So, um, an example of that may be a smartphone or something like that, right? Uh, Going forward, security implications of these embedded systems um, are as follows. So, in a ICS slash Cicada system, so ICS is going to be an industrial control system, and these are network systems that control critical infrastructure. So think about our utilities, right? So those are the systems that run our utilities. Um, we also have a, a cicada, which is a prominent, or SCADA, which is a prominent type of industrial control system. So this is a supervisory control and data acquisition system. So the SCADA system is going to send and receive different types of control signals to embedded systems. An example of this was probably be something like HVAC, right? So HVAC is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And so this service might be able to receive remote signals to raise and lower the temperature. So a lot of these systems were not created with security in mind, and they have their own unique protocols for their data transfers and network connections. So we may have different types of security measures for these, and because these are in utility control systems, these tend to be very important systems that need high security. Microcontrollers. A microcontroller, some of these embedded systems are going to consolidate the CPU, the memories, and the peripherals in a single component. So this would be called a microcontroller. It's also called a system on a chip. And so many of these microcontrollers are going to have built-in encryptions so that our embedded systems uh, don't have to rely on additional software. Um, then we have RTOs, so that is going to be a real-time operating system, and this is a specialized type of operating system, and it's in regular operating systems, the system is going to use a scheduler to balance the processing time for all of our processes, and so this can change the completion times of different processes. So an RTO scheduler is going to be consistent, right? And this is going to make the RTO really important for our embedded systems because we have strict requirements on how tasks should be completed. Um, so, just the same as a regular operating system, these real-time operating systems are going to be vulnerable, right? So we need to include security features such as access control, denial of service protections, and stuff to like protect against malicious code injections. Smart devices. So, a smart device is going to be any electronic device that's not a typical computer, right? And that's connected to a network or has some sort of its own computing properties, right? So, an example would be like a smartwatch or something like that, right? Because because smartwatches are relatively new, uh, people haven't really implemented enough security in them. It's been an afterthought, or it never was thought of at all, right? So these devices tend to be inherently vulnerable. Um, then we have IoT, so that is going to be the Internet of Things. This is going to be like any object that is not a traditional computer but is connected to the wider internet using some sort of embedded electronic components. So our home automation is going to be using IoT to connect a lot of these things to the network, right? This could be lights. That we can control over the internet, right? So people can turn on the lights over their phone. stuff like that. And once again, this is going to have poor security. One thing it says specifically on here is that these devices are electronic or not. I have no idea how a IoT device could be non-electronic. This just completely lost me, and I haven't found anything to say how it's not electronic. So, just in case you've noticed that, I have no idea what they're talking about. Camera systems. A traditional camera system, CCTV, is going to have network surveillance over a limited area, right? Usually like on site. So IP cameras, these are internet protocol cameras, right? This is easier to manage because we can manage these remotely from anywhere in the world, basically. And so the problem with this is it's going to open the camera up to a lot of vulnerabilities that all of our other network devices have, right? We need to make sure that we are using secure practices on these IP cameras. Make sure that we're using encryption. Make sure we're not using the defaults. There are several websites on the internet, as I said before, that you can just go on and watch people's unsecured IP cameras across the globe. Special purpose systems. So this could be stuff like our medical devices, our ATMs, could be cars, right? Drones. And these are all going to have embedded systems in them. The security of these are going to depend on what type of what it is, right? A drone is going to need more security than a car potentially. Also, an ATM, right? People don't want their ATMs robbed, so that's just all going to depend on what we have. So our guidelines for securing the hosts, we're going to want to stay up to date with our vendor security information. We're going to want to apply security settings to our operating systems. This is going to be things like disabling unnecessary services or making sure that we have least privilege applied to our user accounts. We're going to want to create security baselines for our systems so in order to streamline the hardening process, right? That way we have our baseline and we can apply it to everything. We're going to want to compare these baselines to our current configurations and make sure that we're on point. We also want to consider implementing application blacklisting and whitelisting. That way we can restrict the software that's able to run on our systems. We're going to want to ensure that we log all critical activities. That way we are able to review the logs and identify any specific suspicious behaviors. And then we're going to want to prepare for any auditing by external parties to make sure that we're in compliance with all of our policies and regulations. We're going to want to implement any anti-malware solutions on the hosts. We're going to want to consider the unique security implications of different peripherals, right? So, having wireless keyboards and mice have unique security implications, that somebody may access them over Bluetooth or something like that. And then we want to consider the unique implications of embedded systems. So our first activity for this is going to be implementing auditing. You have been asked to detect any unauthorized login attempts to your server. Failed login attempts will be recorded and viewable. This can alert you to repeated password cracking attempts. Our next activity is going to be hardening a server. A recent audit reveals that the following security measures need to be applied. First, we want to scan for and remove any anti-malware. We want to revert the effects of the penetration test. We want to disable Jane Emerson's account and disable any unnecessary services. Moving forward, virtualization. So virtualization is a big thing coming now. So many of our organizations are moving their host functionality to either in-house virtual solutions or external ones through the cloud, right? These are going to have special security considerations. Virtualization is going to be the process of creating a simulation of a computing environment. Virtualized system would be able to simulate hardware, operating systems, applications, without being an actual physical computer. So we would have used that a lot in this course, either NetLab or with our own GBTC VMs, right? So a virtualized computer is going to be called a virtual machine. And then when we use these virtualized machines, they're going to be pretty much what it is to work with the physical computer running that. The only difference is we're going to be running the VM through an application. There are several advantages to using these VMs. They're going to be easier to manage. They're going to be cost efficient because you don't have to sit here and go buy out a whole bunch of new systems, a bunch of new computers, and everything else, right? And they're going to be power and resource efficient because, once again, we don't have to go buy all these new computers, which will be using a whole nother set of power and resource consumption, right? Then we have hypervisors. So a hypervisor is going to be the layer of software that's going to separate the virtual software from the physical hardware that it runs on. So hypervisors manage resources on a physical host and provide them multiple environments. This would be like virtual guests and stuff, right? This is going to enable a bunch of flexibility, kind of increase the efficiency of the hardware by being able to run multiple guest systems on a single host, right? And each one of these would operate as its own independent system. So there are two different types of hypervisors. There is type 1 and type 2. So type 1 is going to run directly on the host hardware and manage the guest virtual environments that way. And then type 2 is going to be run as an application on top of the current of the host operating system, right? So this would be, you start up your machine and you go to Windows or Mac OS, and then you have to start up Hyper-V or VirtualBox or something, and then you can run your Linux machine or something like that, right? And that is a type 2. A type 1 would have been starting the computer and then directly being able to change whether you want to run Mac or Windows without ever going onto an operating system. So, an example of this, once again, we have the hardware followed by the hypervisor, and then let's say Mac and Windows or Windows and Linux, right? And then type 2, which is normally what you guys are going to see, would be your hardware followed by your host operating system, so your Windows 10 or your Mac. And then you have your hypervisor, so this may be Hyper-V, this may be VirtualBox, and then you can choose what operating system you want to run off through that, so maybe Linux and something else, right? Virtual desktop infrastructure is going to use virtualization to separate personal computing environments from the physical machine. So, in a virtual desktop infrastructure, our system and its applications are going to run inside the VM that is hosted on servers in that virtualized infrastructure, right? And so then we have VMs, and those are running on a desktop, right? Those are virtual desktop environments. So we can deploy VDEs, virtual desktop environments, for users in our organization to make it easier for them to manage their resources, right, on their PC environments. And this can also save us money when purchasing new computers. When it comes to virtualization and security, we're going to have patch management, and then patch management is going to be a system that we want to have in place to make sure that we have all our relevant patches installed, right? And this is going to be important because there's going to be new patches released all the time, even for the virtualization software itself. So we need to make sure that we are determining when we need to install these new system patches. And once again, we're going to want to operate with the principle of least privilege. Access to all these environments need to be monitored on a regular basis in order to prevent any unauthorized access. We're also going to want to log these things, right? The user and system activities in this virtual desktop environment have to be logged and reviewed for any irregular activities or any possible security breaches. Networking. So, although the virtual networking may not be exactly the same as physical devices, right? We can have virtual switches versus, physical switches, right? But we still need to enable connectivity between our systems only when it's necessary, especially because people can escape the VM and get onto our host device. So we need to make sure or try to make sure that we isolate traffic between the host and the guest. Snapshots. So we're going to want to consistently capture snapshots at a certain date and time. That way we can have a quick and easy way to recover our environment should it become compromised, right? We're going to want to avoid VM sprawl. So VM sprawl is going to occur when we have too many VMs that we can't really manage or control anymore, right? Maybe we lose notice of a VM and, that ends up getting used maliciously at some point in time. So we're going to want to use VM lifecycle management solutions in order to have a centralized dashboard to monitor all these VM environments. And then we want VM escape protection because, once again, malicious code or persons can try to escape the VM, right? And so this code can interact with the hypervisor and then directly affect our underlying host and access all the then maybe even get directly into our network. The best way to protect against VM escape is to make sure that our virtualization software is going to be up to date, right? And limit any resource sharing. Cloud computing. So, cloud computing is going to involve real time communication over distributed networks, and they're going to provide resources between software, data, and media for needs of our users, of our businesses, of our differing organizations. So, the cloud is going to refer to resources that are available on a particular network, right? This is just stuff on a server somewhere. So maybe a storage server, photo servers, right? If you guys upload stuff to Google Cloud, or Apple Google Photos, that's all cloud services. Microsoft Office 365, that's a cloud service. So these cloud services, we can access and manage our resources from anywhere, pretty much in the world. The storage and location of these are not going to be available to the consumer because these are going to be services from some other organization, right? Most of the time, and it's always going to use one or more methods of virtualization to ensure that these resources are going to be quickly and easily given to us as the clients. There are security implications to this, and so this is going to be very similar to the security implications of regular virtualization. There are several different cloud deployment models. Since the cloud is going to help us offload requirements and the complexity of actually managing these systems ourselves, we can give this to a third party provider. With these systems that we host in the cloud, the organization is going to be able to function on other aspects of the business, right? However, the disadvantage here is going to be that the organization is not going to have full control over these systems. The cloud provider is the true person in charge here. There are four basic models of cloud computing. We have private cloud computing, and this is going to be distributed by a single company or business entity. It could be internal hosting, it could be off site. This is going to enable the entity greater control over its services. It's usually geared towards banking and governmental organizations, right? The government will have its own cloud, or the Bank of America, or stuff like that, or Google. They might have their own private thing going on. A public cloud is going to be done by organizations to offer its services to consumers at large. Typically, it offers a pay-as-you-go subscription. Sometimes the lowest ones offer free services, but remember, nothing is truly free. You'd likely want to check the terms and conditions and the privacy policies on anything free on the internet. Security is always going to be a concern because one, it is on the internet, and two, it is not in your control. It is in control of Apple, Google, Amazon, whoever. Then we have community. So community is going to be typically multiple organizations that share ownership of a cloud, and then this is going to be done to pool together resources, maybe some sort of standardization or security policy. And then we have hybrid. So hybrid is going to combine two or more of the previous models. The advantage here is basically going to be that we can have internal cloud servers for our organizations. So say Amazon has its own cloud servers for its workers internally, and then externally it has the stuff that it sells to us as consumers. Then there are different cloud service types. There are four main ones. There is, and you are going to see all these on your test, I promise. There is going to be software as a service, so that is SaaS. That is going to refer to cloud applications, right? And so stuff like this is going to be like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce. In this case, we're not going to need users to install any software on their computer. It's going to be run completely in the cloud. All those Google Drive programs, all of that, right? You don't need to download Word or something like that, right? You could do all that in the cloud. Then we have platform as a service, so PaaS. This is going to refer to as basically providing us with virtual operating systems, right? So we might have SQL databases. We might have all of a Windows environment. Also involved in this is stuff like Google App Engine. And then we have infrastructure as a service. So that is IaaS. And this is going to be using the cloud to provide infrastructure needs, right? So this might be a data center or a server. This is typically, the Amazon Web Service stuff, right? A lot of this stuff, not like just the machine learning type stuff, but typically what I'm talking about here is the ability to host all these databases in the cloud, right? Amazon is using, I mean, sorry, not Amazon, but Netflix uses infrastructure as a service to provide its worldwide empire of streaming. And then finally, we have security as a service. This is going to provide resources for security purposes, right? So we can have a provider that's going to give us authentication, anti-malware, intrusion detection, and everything else, and operate our security for us, basically. Examples of this is going to be companies like Cloudflare, FireEye, and SonicWall. So the guidelines when securing virtualized and cloud-based resources are going to be considering the fact that using virtualization in our organization is going to allow for easier management and efficiency of our resources. We're going to need to identify which virtualization types are most suitable to our needs. We're going to want to ensure that the VM software that we use is going to be patched regularly as on the host and on the guest. We're going to want to enforce the principle of least privilege on our VMs and also for access to our VMs. We're going to want to ensure that our VMs are logging critical events. We're going to want to configure virtual networking devices in order to isolate communications when necessary, meaning we don't want people to jump back and forth, be able to escape the VM basically. We're going to want to take snapshots of optimal VM states, that way we can revert if we need to. We're going to want to incorporate VM lifecycle management solutions. We need to familiarize ourselves with the different desktop deployment models and services in case we need to go ahead and use one of those, and then consider offloading some of these security operations to security as a service providers in order to make it a little easier. Mobile device connection methods. We have a multitude of mobile devices nowadays, right? And so many of these mobile devices that are everywhere, they're going to use different methods to communicate with other devices and networks. So each method is going to have its own implications for security. So first up, we have the cellular method, a cellular network that is going to enable mobile devices to connect to wireless transceivers in fixed locations, right? And so these transceivers are called cells, right? The cell towers, right? You'll see them everywhere. You'll see them some of them are designed to look like trees. Some of them are on top of apartment buildings. You'll know them when you see them if you're really paying attention. These cellular networks, though, are primarily used by mobile phones for voice and text communications. They also incorporate our data transmissions, and so that's where a lot of these are going on now, right? So we went from 4G to 5G now. We originally had 2 and 3G. And I believe 5G is going to go up to 100 gigabytes per second when it comes to data speeds. So while modern networks incorporate these special security measures for encryption, the users themselves and any organization that is going to use these cell towers, they're not going to have any control on how the network configures its security, right? Because you rent the services of the cellular provider out. Basically, you own the phone and then you get service from a cellular provider, and you are beholden to whatever they are enabling on their network. Then we have Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is designed for local area connections, right? LAN connections. So we have secure Wi-Fi networks that are going to incorporate authentication and encryption services that's going to allow us to transmit our data without it being intercepted or deciphered by an attacker. However, some of these Wi-Fi network configurations are going to be insecure. We learned about some of these already, right? So WEP was an insecure configuration, and so we're not supposed to use that. We're not supposed to use WPA anymore, but we should be using WPA2. And so organizations are going to have a lot more control over Wi-Fi networks than a cellular network, right? Because you can control how your LAN is going to work, right? And what authentication mechanisms you use. Then we have Bluetooth. So Bluetooth is another wireless technology that's going to facilitate short range communications between separate mobile devices, right? And so this creates what's called a personal area network, or PAN, between devices. And so, for instance, right now, I am actually on a PAN device, or sorry, not a device, but a PAN network, a personal area network, because I am talking through a Bluetooth headset in order to record this video. Bluetooth, however, is going to be susceptible to attacks because we have things like bluejacking, in which the attacker sends unwanted signals to our device, or blue snarfing, in which they're going to intercept any communications that we may use between devices. Then we have NFC. So that's going to be near field communication. That's another communication between mobile devices, and this is going to be between in close proximity. Also, we'll use this for stuff like transactions between point of sale systems and our mobile devices, right? This is going to be susceptible to certain attacks, such as radio frequency attacks, right? And this is going to also be susceptible to things like denial of service flooding, right? So maybe they cause the point of sale system not to be able to conduct transactions. So that's our Apple Pays and Google Play, Samsung Pay and stuff. Next up after that, we have infrared transmission. This is going to be our remotes for our TVs and stuff like that. A lot of the times, right, they have the little IR front to it. That's a little piece of glass right there. And then you're supposed to pretty much point it at the TV, and then it's sent as the transmission of signal is sent as a pulse of infrared light. Devices that use this, they're going to need unobstructed view to successfully receive the signal. If you, as a child, put your hand over the TV so your sibling couldn't change the channel, that's why, right? Because it had directional requirements for the pulse to be received. And so if you blocked it, they never were able to get it. And so these directional requirements prevent data leakage. So if you point it somewhere else besides where you meant to point it, that could potentially get the signal, right? SATCOM. So SATCOM is going to be mobile devices that use satellite communications. SATCOM, right? So this is going to be used to send and receive radio signals from orbiting satellites. These satellites relay signals according to line of sight to different locations around the world. This is popular with military organizations. You may have seen these if you were in any shape or form involved with military operations, either as a soldier or as a contractor. They're pretty widespread. SATCOM networks typically use a form of encryption to keep communications confidential. However, researchers have been shown to be able to break some of these encryptions or make them at least vulnerable. ANT. So ANT is a wireless technology that's going to be similar to Bluetooth, but it consumes small amounts of energy. Much smaller amounts of energy, and it's going to be used in communications between sensors. So this is going to be your heart rate monitors, your fitness monitors, like your Apple Watch, how it monitors your health, right? And features can have access control and encryption methods for security as well. USB, so that also creates a PAN, a personal area network, but these are mobile devices that connect to computers, right, through a USB stick or port, right? And so this allows us to transfer and synchronize data. It's going to mitigate some wireless risks, but however, it's going to be susceptible to transmitted malware, right? So if you plug in a USB to an infected computer, you will likely be able to contract that malware on your USB stick or vice versa. Mobile device management. Mobile device management, you may see this as MDM. This is going to be the process of tracking, controlling, and securing our organization's mobile infrastructure. So MDM solutions are going to be web-based platforms with a centralized console. That way we can administer our security. So using this MDM, we enforce our organizational policies on all mobile devices that connect to our network at one time. So meaning you can do things like securely enforce a screen lock on multiple devices, right? So once the device is locked, it can only be entered by accessing the code. We can also use it to enforce strong pins and passwords and even full device encryption. That way, in case somebody accesses one of these devices, they cannot obtain it. Mobile device security controls. Well, we went over screen lock and strong pins and passwords. What else we could have is remote wipe and lockouts. A lot of this is offered through iCloud, right? We could put a screen lock on a device if somebody was to access a lost device, then they could only open the screen if they knew the password, but otherwise it would most likely tell them to call your phone number or alert you through email that somebody found that device. But we can also do stuff like remote wipes and lockouts. So remote wipe is going to remove any sensitive data permanently and delete it if it's not in the possession of the person that is intended for. Remote lockout, so that's pretty much what I talked about a second ago. We would restrict the access to data unless somebody had the ability to bypass the lockout, set for instance having the correct key to unencrypt it. So that way we can focus these functions on the device if it's lost or stolen, right? And then so we should also have some sort of guidelines and requirements in our security policy if we are using options on our on our company phones, right? We can also have geolocation and geofencing. So geolocation is going to be the tracking of the geographic location device. So that's just like the Find My iPhone, right? You can access this as a security measure to find out where they are actually located at and hopefully obtain them. Geofencing, however, is the practice of creating a virtual boundary. And this can be used to create a perimeter, say, around your property and limit the functionality of any device that exceeds that boundary. I've seen this a lot in hotels, especially Vegas. At one time I was there, and they incorporate geofencing in their Wi-Fi to make sure that nobody's getting free Wi-Fi from them. Access controls. Access control is going to be talked about this a lot, right? We are going to say who can and can't access what, right? So we can implement authentication and authorization for employees to use mobile devices and uphold the principle of least privilege, right? So we could have stuff like authentication through biometrics like fingerprints or Face ID, right? We could also use context-aware authentication, and that would take into the current situation at hand and then make authentication and authorization decisions based upon that. So, for example, maybe we have a mobile device that's going to lock access to a particular application if it detects that this application is connected to the internet over public Wi-Fi or something like that, right? So that would be context-aware authentication. Then we have application and content management. We can set restrictions on what applications and content a user might be able to access on their device. So depending on what we need, we could set a whitelist of applications on the device that we deem safe and block the rest of all other applications. Or we can have a blacklist of apps that we decide are off limits to our employees. Then we can have asset tracking and inventory control. All right, so this is going to be keeping stock of all of our provisioned devices. All these devices need to be accounted for. Push notification services. So push notification services are a notification or communication sent by a centralized server to multiple clients at one point in time, right? At a click of a button, basically. So in mobile devices, we can send out a text message or something to all employees and devices. So MC has something called MC Alerts, in which in the case of an incident, it sends a mass alerts to all of the students and staff in case of any issues. We can also limit removable storage capability. Because removable storage detaches information from a user and device, our employees need to exercise good precautions, right? It's easy to lose these things, and we need to make sure that they don't have sensitive information, especially in plain text on them, right? So there are major operating systems, mobile operation systems that can help us to limit exposure that certain apps and their stored data have to other apps and different processes on a device. Thing is, removable storage isn't usually given that same protections. So this would be stuff like a SD card on Samsung phones. We should also think about storage segmentation. So with storage segmentation, we can divide data storage along certain lines on our phones, so we could have local storage on our telephone or mobile device, and cloud storage, so that way we can segment the data between our network and our mobile device itself. We can also have containerization, so there are mobile devices that allow the use of virtual containers in order to isolate sensitive applications from the regular storage on our device, so that way malicious software they'll have problems spreading to these isolated containers in case the device becomes infected. So there are a couple operating systems that offer this. However, Android enforces this by default between your applications and your regular phone storage. I'm not sure about Apple. We should also disable unused features on our devices. So every feature that we have has the potential to become a point of vulnerability. So it's a good practice to disable features that we're not going to use, especially on our owned by an organization, right? So we should probably not sync our Google accounts with a corporate owned phone. Or maybe we shouldn't allow the calculator to access camera, right? It's unnecessary. So when it comes to mobile device monitoring and enforcement, in addition to our regular security controls, a good management system is going to enable us to monitor activity and enforce these policies, right? Some policies we may want to consider is limiting app installation from third-party stores. So a third-party store allows users to download apps that are not vetted to the degree of the third-party of the official store application. So we should probably monitor third-party store use or block their use altogether. So basically, if you were to jailbreak an iPhone, there are third-party stores online which offer completely free applications that you would normally have to pay for on the Apple Store or whatever they call that thing. But the thing is about these third party stores is these applications, there's a high chance of them having malicious software on them, and that's why we should probably disable their use altogether, in addition to any legal problems there is to it. There's something called app side loading. So side loading is going to be directly installing an application package on a mobile device itself rather than downloading it through an app store. These apps, once again, have not been verified and they need to be monitored. So on things such as Fire Stick or another Amazon device, you can turn on developer options which allow you to download side-loaded applications. These side-loaded applications may allow certain activities which once again are not legal. That is actually how people use the Fire Stick to stream things that they shouldn't be allowed to stream. When it comes to rooting and jailbreaking, rooting is the process of enabling root privileges on an Android device. These are disabled by default, and this allows Android to keep some sort of security over the device, but also if you were to enable rooting, this allows the users to gain complete control over the device, and this is going to bypass those inherent operating system security measures. And then there's a similar concept for iOS, which is called jailbreaking, and this is going to remove software just restrictions on that device, and it allows users to run applications from third parties, right? And both of these are going to severely impact the security of these devices. Finally, we have custom firmware configurations. So it is possible to configure custom firmware on Android devices. And so this will allow the user to make a whole bunch of changes on the device that they can't with the actual manufacturer's firmware. A lot of users that do root their telephones will upload new firmware, which allows them to install new operating systems and things of that nature. So it would allow an Android device to basically function similar to an iPhone or some sort of custom idea that somebody has made up, right? It is a very easy way to destroy a phone. I have done it several times myself, and it essentially turns your phone into a brick if it is not done properly. It will either open you up to security flaws or render your device completely inoperable. We also have another set of activities we might want to monitor and enforce. Geotagging, which is going to tag media when people take video and audio and picture recordings. A lot of times your geographic location is going to be captured on the device, right? Called geotagging. People have, copied pictures or downloaded them off the internet from users' social media and have been able to track down their exact location due to the geotagging that are on photos and videos, right? So they imprint geographic coordinates a lot of times. Be aware of that when you upload things to the internet. External media use, we should limit what type of external media we use, such as SD cards. There's something else called USB on the go. So this will enable two devices to connect over USB, and one would be the master of the other. So essentially, the master device serves as the host, and maybe we want to connect a USB thumb drive to a smartphone to transfer data to each device, right? So in this case, the phone's going to be the host. And so just like with any other external media, this may enable the device to leak sensitive data because that storage medium isn't under our direct control. When it comes to SMS and MMS, that is simple message service and multimedia message service. So these are text messages and are multimedia messages, such as sending a picture through the phone. So as with any other communication medium, this can bring about the unintentional risk of data leakage or even intentional. So we may wish to monitor all SMS and MMS transmissions of our employees. Wi-Fi direct use. So Wi-Fi direct enables two devices to connect with each other without a wireless access point. So this is going to be similar to Bluetooth, right? It's going to eliminate the need for a router. So having a lack of centralized architecture could make it hard for us to monitor wireless communications between users. And then tethering. So tethering is the sharing of an internet connection with other devices. Typically, we'll see a user using a laptop or something, and since they're not near Wi-Fi, they would tether their phone to the laptop and then use their phone's cellular network connection to create internet usage capabilities. Typically, cellular networks charge for this. However, some don't. Users that have rooted their phones don't have to pay for that either. And then finally, we have payment method usage. We may decide that we want to monitor or enforce the use of a single payment app. So there are things such as Cash App, things such as Venmo, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay. We may decide that one of these is more secure than another, and so we may want to monitor and enforce the use of a single payment application. There are several different mobile deployment methods, and because mobile device usage has been so increasingly adopted by the workplace, this is going to raise security concerns when it comes to ownership, management, or reachability. So there are several ways our businesses can deploy mobile device infrastructure to an organization, and we'll go over a couple of these deployment methods. We have corporate owned deployment methods. So in this case, the organization is going to be the sole owner of a mobile device, and they are only for work-related purposes, basically. All right, so we have the corporate-owned deployment method, and so in this method, the organization is the sole owner for all mobile devices that are going to be used for work-related purposes. So since the organization is solely responsible or has sole ownership for this device, they have sole responsibility for its maintenance and management. So because this deployment model is going to allow the organization to have complete control of the phone, it's the most secure option. This is likely going to prohibit employees from using their own devices, so this may not be a realistic model to enforce in a lot of situations. Maybe more so in a government situation where NSA or something like that, but a lot of employees are still going to try to bring their own devices a lot of times, or use them on their own time, your corporate owned device, so it may not be too feasible. Then we have bring your own device. So that's BYOD. This is where an employee is going to own and manage their own personal device. So this is increasingly common because phones are integral in everyday life of everybody nowadays. The problem with this is this practice is going to introduce a whole bunch of security issues and legal concerns to the corporate environment. Since it is the employee's personal property, anything on that mobile device is out of the employer's control. So it's going to be difficult to account for risks, threats, or vulnerabilities with these devices. It's also going to come up with issues of ownership for any sorts of company data that may be held on these phones. Then we have choose your own device. In choose your own device, it's similar to the bring your own device model. The user is going to be responsible for their own device and may be considered even the owner of that device. However, the organization would only allow specific devices that have already been tested for security and functionality purposes to be used. Choose your own device is going to be an attempt to mitigate some of these major vulnerabilities
that we may have. Also, not be as strict as that corporate owned device model. Then we have COPE. So COPE is going to be corporate owned, personally enabled. This model, the organization allows an employee to choose the device that they want to work with, right? So instead of CYOD, where usually the device is basically their own device, they've just chose from a list of vetted devices. This is where the employer has allowed users to select what device they want to use and allows them to use this device for personal activities. However, it is corporate owned. They've already vetted this device for security issues. So there may still be some privacy issues involved here that may throw some users off because the organization can access personal information on these devices because the organization technically owns these devices. And then we have VMI. So just like virtual desktop infrastructure, we can have virtual mobile infrastructure. So that is VMI. In this case, employees would use their own personal device rather than have an operating system such as Android. Maybe their device allows them to run Apple virtual machine. Basically, this is running a virtual machine on your phone. It would be a different phone running a different operating system, would act like a different is just going to be an application that you would click on your device, and then you would have a virtual phone running on top of your own phone, and then you would use that phone during work, that virtual phone, and then after you're done with work, you would no longer use it. You would exit the application and move on using your phone as you normally did. So when it comes to security control policies, when it comes to BYOD anyway, we're going to want to think of several different things for bring your own device. First, we're going to want to draft a policy for how a bring your own device is going to be treated in the organization. Draft an acceptable use policy that our employees need to use. So we might mandate that, okay, bring your own device is not tolerated at all. Or we might say, okay, how our security team may respond to incidences that happen on a bring your own device. So we should draft that acceptable use policy and clearly outline what type of devices are going to be allowed and what types of devices will not be allowed on our network. And this policy is going to depend on user acceptance to be effective. So we need to make sure that everyone in our organization is going to be compliant with this. When it comes to ownership decisions, we're going to, even though an employee's personal device is their own property, there could be blurred lines of ownership when it comes to our company data. So we're going to want to come up with a clear boundary that is going to define what the employee owns and what the company owns. So that way, an employee who is allowed to access and administer company secrets on their personal device can't claim ownership of those secrets. Another question we might ask is, who is going to offer support for these bring your own devices? A company that provisions its own hardware and software should be able to provide help desk support, but maybe there's a whole bunch of different variety of devices that our employees are bringing into the office, and so we may not have adequate support that we can offer. But also there may be security vulnerabilities that exist in your employees' personal devices that might affect the network at large. Patch management and anti-malware. Depending on the operating system and the software, some mobile devices are going to be easily patched. However, others can be more difficult to patch, and that's going to leave them more vulnerable. So we need to consider a patch management system that's going to be able to mitigate the threat of any outdated hardware and software. A lot of these devices also may lack anti-malware software, so we're going to want to prevent our network from infection. In this way, we'll need to encourage our users to download anti-malware apps onto those personal devices. We should also consider any of our architecture and infrastructure needs. So as more and more devices get added to our corporate network, we're going to need to expand and update our infrastructure. Our office setup may be inadequate to serve such a large number of multiple devices because people keep on adding devices all day long, right? So if our network architecture isn't focused enough on wireless devices, we're going to need to change that in order to accommodate all these devices, all these bring your own devices that are entering our network. So wireless networking is going to introduce new challenges to our organization's security in that. Forensics, as bringing your own devices become more prevalent, so too is going to be the reliance on security investigations. This might be a challenge because there's different operating systems and different hardware that we need to perform forensics on. We're going to need to have up-to-date knowledge on forensic tools and procedures. We need to make sure that these procedures encompass a wide variety of devices. When it comes to privacy support, our employees may be concerned that their privacy is at risk because because they're exposed to the corporate network, especially if there's a lot of people on this network. So we're going to want to reassure our employees and provide them with the tools and know how to keep that information private. Guidelines for implementing mobile device security. We need to be aware of the different connection methods that mobile devices may use. We need to be aware of the different levels of control that we have over these connection methods. So remember, we have more control over Wi-Fi than we do over cellular. Right? We need to incorporate a mobile device management platform in our organization. That way we can turn on and off phones and maybe track where they're at. We need to implement security controls on mobile devices and monitor activities associated with mobile devices, such as, has this person rooted the phone, or are they downloading things from unsecured third-party app stores? We're going to want to enforce policies to curtail or disable certain activities like the ones I just mentioned. Consider the different ways that mobile devices can be deployed, whether that be CYOD, so corporate owned devices, or personally owned devices. If we're going to allow users to bring their own device, we need to be aware of the inherent risks of allowing that, because hey, they might introduce insecure things to our network. And then we also want to apply various security controls to combat any of these bring your own device risks. Our next activity is implementing mobile device security. There's been an influx of mobile device usage at Developtech. The CEO is going to ask us how this will impact security. You will need to consider new security concerns and how to address them. The software development lifecycle. As a member of an information security team, we're going to want to be invested in the software development process, even if we're not coding directly. Any app developed by the organization or a third party specifically for the organization is part of the organization's assets, and so it is part of the security process. So this is going to be the practice of developing software across a life cycle from its initial planning to its final development. The application life cycle within an organization is going to have several different phases. Each, for the software development lifecycle to be effective, we're going to want to integrate information security controls into each step. Several steps, and these will change depending on what organization is talking about this. But for this example, the initiation of the project, so maybe deciding that they're going to create one in the first place, designing of that project, implementing that project, testing that project, deploying that project to the community at large, and then disposing of it. And we need to integrate security at each phase of this. So of these software development models, we have the waterfall method. And in the waterfall method, each phase starts when the previous phase finishes. Typical phases, this is going to be the initiation and drafting requirements phase, the design phase, implementation phase, the verification and testing phase, and the maintenance and disposal phase. So because each one of these phases cannot proceed without the successful completion of each of the previous phases, this ensures that security issues are found much earlier and they're going to be cheaper to fix. However, because it's so rigid, it may also negatively impact our security efforts because requirements can change. There's an evolving threat to security on an everyday basis because of, computers change all the time. So the waterfall method doesn't account for any of these changes and requirements after we move on to later phases. Our security concerns may change at any point in the process, and so this may be unsuitable for us. And especially, it's already unsuitable in the modular approach because you have to finish one point after another. The agile method, on the other hand, is a big thing in software development in general. The agile model is going to focus on adaptive measures in various phases, right? So we're going to have a development team that's more able to respond to any changes. Our tasks are going to be broken up incrementally so that there's no long-term planning, right? We're only going to have short iterations, and the developers can then change their stance in order to fit any evolving needs. This will be useful in complex, unstable products that are hard to predict how we're going to change things. So we're going to have an overall idea of how we want to do things, and we're going to just break things up into, okay, this week we're going to get this part of the web page done. Next week we're going to get that part, or we're going to implement this feature or that feature, right? However, the agile method is going to focus on rapid development, so this is going to underline security as well. We could be releasing code every single week or every single day, and the problem here is we're going to be introducing new and untested functionality at a fast rate, and this is going to make it difficult for us to keep up with vulnerabilities, or we might forget about security completely, and then it becomes an afterthought that we have to tack on later on. DevOps. So DevOps is a combination of software development and systems operations. And it's going to refer to the practice of integrating one discipline with another. So it's the integration of software development and systems operations. An example would be like, consider you have a software development team that's going to be building an application that has some sort of network functionality, like maybe synchronizing files to a web server, right? And so in a standard environment, the development is going to be isolated from the rest of the IT team. So it's going to be difficult for people to stress test this functionality on the network, right? So in a DevOps culture, the network architect and administrators they're going to be able to help provision the type of infrastructure that we need to test the app's networking capabilities without messing up the rest of our business process. Having continuous integration is going to help improve the IT operations all around. And then from a security perspective, we'd be able to improve security automation, right? Because we'd have the ability to configure and generate and deploy baselines as we go. And then we can align with the idea of infrastructure as code, because our infrastructure in that way can be quickly configured and deployed through programming scripts rather than standardized software tools. Versioning or version control is going to be the practice of ensuring that changes to projects' assets are closely managed in discrete versions. This is going to include making marking a milestone of changes as its own version number. And so each version would have a timestamp. An example here will be uploading your code to a repository, and then when the code is modified, changes are going to be marked as a new version. So if you're familiar with Git allows you to update code as you go along. We can revert to earlier versions if we need to do so. So maybe we start off with an outline basically of a website we're building. So we have our pages up. They don't have any content yet. So that's going to be version 1. And then version 2, maybe we start adding the content to the page. Maybe version 3, we start getting in the colors and overall look of the page. Maybe version 4, we add in some sort of functionality. However, in security, we want to make sure that we have introduced this from the security from the get-go. Honestly, what we should have done is implement our security at the beginning, sort of security framework. So maybe we'd have started off with a login screen. In any case, we can revert back to any previous version if we need to do so. All right, so one major component of security is writing the code itself and making sure that it is secure when it's written. Secure coding techniques, as we talked about before, poor input handling can lead to unauthorized users gaining access to a system. Input validation is going to involve limiting what characters a person can put into his field, like maybe not allowing special characters in the username field, right? It can also involve taking unrecognized or unwanted input and normalizing it. Basically, that means we would strip away any special encoding and the input would be automatically converted to the specific format that we wanted it to be. So input validation, one way we might want to do this is disallowing code to be put into a form, because you could put in something like SQL code and perform an SQL injection, right? And get a database. So in this case, proper input validation would have mitigated that risk. Error handling. So proper error handling, we shouldn't allow errors to reveal too much information about what's going wrong. So we should anticipate errors to avoid default error messages. So when it comes to SQL injections, I've seen at times where it's an error pop up that tells you that you put in the wrong SQL code. Well, just seeing that that you put in the wrong SQL code tells a user or a potential attacker that they could put in the right SQL code and be able to attack the system, right? Our error handling should be informative, but limit how much specific technical information it's going to provide to a user. Encryption is vital. We've talked about that a lot. When it comes to encryption, we should hash user passwords in order to uphold confidentiality. It's important to make sure that our encryption algorithms are up to date and strong rather than creating our own. So we should use existing algorithms and techniques. When it comes to code signing is going to be a form of digital signature that's going to guarantee that our source code is authentic and has not been tampered with. And it's also valuable because it helps our users verify the legitimacy of our applications. Obfuscation is going to be a technique that's going to basically hide or camouflage code so that it's harder for an unauthorized user to understand or reverse engineer your software. Code reuse. Coding, almost all coding relies upon an existing framework. So if there's already source code, we should use it, right? And if we have permission to do so. So consider taking advantage of this code in your product. And this could be coming from your own organization, or it could be coming from a third party, such as instead of just writing vanilla JavaScript using jQuery. Limiting dead code. Dead code is any code that successfully executes, but its results aren't actually being used in the software. So because it still executes, it can present a security risk. So it's best to identify it and remove it. Server side versus client side. So in the server side should validate, input, and execute code not meant for the user. You shouldn't be able to see that as a user. So something like transmitting data to a database, right? And then client side should be it should handle the execution of GUI based code basically. So it should be the stuff that you see as a user on the screen. Limiting data exposure. So we need to limit how much an application data exposes to the user. So this would be really true when we have multiple users connected to the same system. We don't want them to overlap with each other and give out information about one another, right? Memory management. So some languages manage memory automatically, such like Python and Java, and then others require manual management. And so those that need manual management may be a little bit more susceptible to things like buffer overflows and stuff like that, right? However, those languages like C are typically the faster languages rather than Python. So we're going to have to balance that. Stored procedures. So stored procedures, this is your answer, by the way, for Security Plus. When it asks you, if they ask you a question talking about how you might want to avoid SQL injections, this is how you would combat them. So stored procedures are going to be a set of precompiled database statements that can be used to validate input to a database. So this way they limit the kind of statements that a user can submit to our form. This way we deny a user access to the underlying data and force them to use what we want them to use, such as not being able to put in special characters which may indicate the use of a programming language. Next up we have static code analysis. So static code analysis is a code testing method. Developed code will often go through testing processes in order to validate its quality or its stability or security. So these are different methods. So static code analysis is going to be the process of reviewing code while it's in a static state, meaning it's not executing. So it could be done manually by a software developer who maybe specializes in reviewing code, or it could be done automatically by an analyzing tool that detects common mistakes in code. So if you're familiar with stuff like IntelliJ, that would be things like, having the little red underlines that tell you that, your code is not going to work in this way. Dynamic code analysis, however, is the process of reviewing code while it's executing. So it may help reveal issues that static code analysis miss. Maybe your code looks like it runs, but you put in a certain type of data, user input, and it breaks your code, right? It breaks the website. So that specific process is called fuzzing, and that involves sending an application unusual user input and evaluating how the application is going to respond. When it comes to stress testing is used to evaluate how the software is going to perform under an extreme load. And so the primary purpose of this is to identify if this application can suffer from a denial of service condition, right? When it has high level of resource consumption. Sandboxing is the ability of the tester to configure specific environments in a state in which it's not going to affect anything else, right? It's in an isolated environment from the rest of the network, and it provides the tester with testing results in different contexts. And then we have model verification. So model verification is the process of evaluating how well a project meets certain specifications that were defined in development, right? So we want to make sure that the project's development is fulfilling its stakeholders' needs, right? And we want to go back and determine that. So when it comes to incorporating security in the software development lifecycle, we're going to want to integrate security into each phase of the SDL, and that is the software development lifecycle. You may also see it referred to as the SDLC. We want to choose a development model that most suits our security and business needs, we're going to want to consider adopting a DevOps culture in order to integrate software development with our systems operations. We're going to want to take advantage of software automation and infrastructure as code. We're also going to want to incorporate secure coding techniques such as input validation and stored procedures to avoid any vulnerabilities. And then finally, we're going to want to put our project through various testing methods to evaluate its security, its stability, or its functionality. So our next activity is performing static code analysis. Developtech is creating an Android application for Woodworkers Wheelhouse. You must ensure that developers are writing secure Java code, and you're going to want to analyze the Java code with an automated tool. You will analyze two Java files from the application package.